I'm Rebecca Harlan, 35, a freelance accountant barely making ends meet. That Wednesday evening, my brother casually mentioned he'd used my card for some snacks while lounging on my couch in Brookfield, Wisconsin, scrolling through his phone without a worry. What would you have done if you were in my shoes at 35 facing something like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. The evening unfolded in our modest wooden house near Lake Michigan, where the air carried a faint chill even inside. It was the kind of home I'd scraped together through endless late nights, balancing client ledgers, a place meant for stability, but now feeling crowded and strained. Nathan, my brother, had been staying with us for 9 months, ever since he'd shown up one cool March evening looking more worn down than I'd ever seen him. His job as a car salesman in Green Bay had vanished in a company downsizing, and with no savings or backup plan, he'd turned to me. I'd cleared out the guest room, shifting my son Caleb's art supplies and books to a cramped corner of the living room. Caleb at 12 hadn't complained, but I'd noticed how his posture sagged when I explained it was temporary. At first, Nathan's presence seemed like a chance to help family the way I'd always done. But as weeks stretched into months, his habits grated on me. He'd sleep until midday, leave dishes piled in the sink, and fill the house with the constant buzz of his phone calls or TV shows. I'd come home exhausted from juggling freelance gigs only to find him sprawled out, acting as if the space was his. Caleb ended up doing homework on the couch because Nathan's belongings cluttered the dining table. I'd missed a couple of Caleb's school events too, tied up with extra work to cover the added bills from Nathan's stay, his phone service, takeout orders, even gas for job interviews that never seemed to happen. That night, Nathan's words hung in the air, too offhand, too self-satisfied. My stomach nodded, a quiet alarm I couldn't ignore. I didn't snap back. Instead, I excused myself to my room where my desk held the laptop. That was my lifeline. Fingers hovering over the keys, I logged into my banking app. The screen loaded, and everything froze inside me. $15,000, my entire savings pieced together from those grueling accounting sessions, had disappeared. The transactions scrolled like accusations: $750 for noise-canceling headphones, $3,750 for 4 VIP tickets to a rapper's concert in Milwaukee, $1,125 for a smartwatch pricier than my monthly car payment, $5,000 for a gaming laptop, $1,250 as a deposit on a drone, $3,125 for 2 round-trip flights to Orlando. The list went on each item, a stab of realization. This wasn't an accident or a small slip. Nathan had orchestrated it, timing purchases through the night while I slept. My chest tightened, breath coming shallow as betrayal seeped in cold and unrelenting. I'd trusted him before overlooking patterns that now glared back. 2 years ago, he'd borrowed $250 for groceries, only to post photos from a casino in Green Bay days later. Last fall, it was $600 for rent, followed by sightings of him in a rented sports car. I'd let those slide, convinced family merited patience that he'd turn things around. But staring at this digital trail, I felt foolish, exposed. How long had he eyed my account, waiting for the moment? The phone rang, then pulling me from the haze. It was Dad, his voice steady and almost casual, urging me not to overreact. "He's your brother, Rebecca. Don't turn this into something big." Those words landed like a weight shifting something deep within me, not with fury or tears, but a sharp, silent resolve. I ended the call without argument, my mind already turning to action. While the house slept, I navigated back to the app, freezing every linked account with deliberate clicks. No more access, no leniency. By morning, Nathan's startled yell echoed from the kitchen as he answered an unexpected call from the bank. I sat with my coffee, calm on the surface, knowing this marked the start of reclaiming what was mine. The quiet of that moment lingered, a reminder that hurt often comes from those we hold closest. It wasn't just the money. It was the erosion of trust, the way his greed had overshadowed our daily life. Caleb had been pushed to the edges of his own home. His room commandeered his needs secondary to Nathan's endless wants. I'd sacrificed vacations, upgrades for Caleb's coding interests, all to keep afloat. Now, with the account drained, school fees loomed, and the mortgage on our little haven pressed harder. But in that silence, I found a spark of strength, a decision to protect what mattered most. The path ahead felt uncertain yet. For the first time, I sensed the power in drawing lines, even if it meant facing the family's fallout. 9 months ago, on a cool March evening in Brookfield, Wisconsin, my brother showed up at my door looking defeated. The wind off Lake Michigan carried a sharp edge that night, rattling the screens on our wooden house as I opened the door. Nathan stood there with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his eyes downcast, and his usual easy grin nowhere in sight. He'd lost his position as a car salesman at a dealership in Green Bay, caught in a wave of layoffs that hit his spotty record hardest. With no cushion to fall back on and no other options, he'd driven straight to me, his voice low, as he admitted he needed a place to stay just for a few weeks. I stepped aside, letting him in my mind, already weighing the duty that had always pulled me toward family, even when it stretched me thin. Our home wasn't large, a compact wooden structure I'd managed to mortgage through careful freelance work, but it had been enough for Caleb and me. I cleared the guest room that evening, stacking Caleb's sketch pads, markers, and stacks of books into a makeshift pile in the living room corner. Caleb watched from the hallway, his young frame slouching a bit as I explained the situation. At 12, he was old enough to understand temporary meant something flexible, but I caught the subtle dip in his enthusiasm, the way he nodded without his usual spark. I promised him it wouldn't last long, that Nathan would get back on his feet soon. Deep down, I wanted to believe it too, holding on to the idea that helping kin was what held us together. In those early days, I threw myself into supporting him. I handed over cash for essentials like groceries and covered his phone bill to keep him connected for potential job leads. I even picked up a few new outfits for him, simple button-downs and slacks suitable for interviews drawing from my tight budget. Nathan flashed that familiar, charming smile, assuring me he was on the hunt, applying here and there. But as the calendar pages turned, his efforts faded. He'd rise late, often afternoon, padding around in socks while I was already deep into client accounts on my laptop. The living room became his domain, with the TV droning sports, or shows his phone pinging notifications that seemed more social than professional. The strain showed in small ways at first. I'd returned from a long day of number crunching, my eyes bleary from screens, only to find the sink overflowing with plates and cups he'd used. Caleb adapted quietly, spreading his schoolwork across the couch cushions because Nathan's scattered papers and gadgets claimed the dining table. Once I found Caleb's soccer shoe tucked under a heap of Nathan's unfolded laundry, and when I asked him to tidy up, he shrugged it off with a casual, "Relax, it's no big deal." That phrase echoed too many times, a careless dismissal that chipped away at my patience. I'd started missing moments with Caleb. His parent-teacher conference slipped by because I took on an extra client to offset the rising costs of Nathan's presence, like his streaming accounts or impromptu food deliveries. Dad didn't help ease the load. He'd call from his place across town, his tone warm yet insistent, reminding me that family came first. To him, Nathan was still the quick-witted kid who'd charmed his way through scrapes, the one deserving of endless leeway. When I hinted at Nathan's lack of drive, Dad waved it away. "He's in a tough spot right now," he'd say. "You've got steady work, Rebecca. It's on you to keep things steady for all of us." That word responsibility landed heavy a mantle I'd worn since childhood. I'd always been the fixer, stepping up with bills or solutions while Nathan glided by. Dad praised my strength, but it felt like a trap binding me to endless giving without acknowledgement of the toll. As months passed, the home's rhythm shifted under Nathan's weight. Caleb stopped bringing friends over, perhaps embarrassed by the clutter, or Nathan's booming conversations on speakerphone. I'd overhear Nathan promising someone he'd settle a debt soon, but job applications, I printed listings myself, warehouse shifts, retail openings in Brookfield, but he'd glance at them and mutter about not settling for dead-end roles. He craved his old, high-rolling sales life, yet refused to start from the bottom. Meanwhile, my savings dipped funneled into his emergencies instead of the new laptop I'd eyed for Caleb's coding classes. The boy had a real knack for it, his eyes lighting up over simple programs, but those plans stalled as I prioritized keeping the lights on. Looking back, the pattern was clear, woven into our shared history. Nathan had leaned on me since we were young, crashing his first car and borrowing from my piggy bank savings to fix it, dropping out of community college after I covered his books. Each time he'd dodge with a joke or vague promise, and Dad would nod along, urging patience. I'd carried it all, believing strength meant enduring. But 9 months in, with Nathan's inertia dragging us down, I felt the exhaustion bone deep. My freelance hours stretched longer to compensate skipping meals here and there to stretch the budget. Caleb's quiet resilience tugged at me. He'd curl up with his homework in odd spots, never voicing complaint, but I saw the dimming in his usual energy. The house, once a sanctuary for us two, now felt squeezed every corner, echoing Nathan's entitlement. I'd given so much space, money, time, hoping for change, but it only enabled more of the same. Dad's calls reinforced the cycle, his blind faith in Nathan erasing my sacrifices. As that March arrival faded into routine, I began to question how much longer I could hold the weight without breaking. Little did I know the breaking point lurked just ahead, tied to that casual mention of snacks and the digital theft that would force my hand. Looking back over the years in Brookfield, Wisconsin, I saw how I'd always been the one fixing things for my family. Those memories surfaced as I sat at my desk in our wooden house near Lake Michigan, the soft hum of the laptop fan, the only sound breaking the quiet. The screen still displayed the damning bank statement from that Wednesday evening, the figures etched into my mind like scars. $15,000 vanished, each transaction a deliberate choice Nathan had made. But this wasn't isolated. It rooted in a history I'd too often overlooked. 2 years earlier in 2023, he'd come to me with a plea for $250, claiming it was for groceries during a tight spot. I'd wired it over, drawing from my modest freelance earnings, only to spot his social media updates days later, selfies from a casino in Green Bay, grinning amid flashing lights. I'd brushed it aside, then chalking it up to a momentary lapse, convinced family bonds demanded forgiveness. Last fall, in 2024, the pattern repeated. Nathan needed $600 for rent, his voice urgent over the phone. Again, I covered it, dipping into savings I'd earmarked for Caleb's future. A week later, I drove past him in a flashy rented sports car, top down and music blaring. He waved it off as a treat when I mentioned it, but the sting lingered. How many times had I enabled this? As kids, he'd crash his bike and expect me to share my allowance for repairs. In community college, I'd paid for his textbooks, hoping he'd stick with it, but he dropped out without a backward glance. Dad always framed it as my role, the reliable one, the glue patting my back while excusing Nathan's charm as harmless. Now, with the account drained, those echoes fueled a rising anger. My chest constricted as I scrolled through the app again, the luxury items mocking my sacrifices, the headphones for $750, concert tickets at $3,750, the smartwatch over $1,000. This went beyond snacks. Nathan had accessed my card from that one-time pizza order. We'd shared his email, tied to the purchases without a hint of remorse. He'd known my struggles, the late nights, poring over client books in our Brookfield home, skipping personal treats to build a college fund for Caleb, dreaming of a better school district. Yet he'd squandered it on whims I'd never indulge. I grabbed my phone hand steadier than I felt and dialed the bank. The representative's voice came through, bored but efficient, pulling up my details. "These are linked to Nathan Harlan, 88, she said, confirming the alternate email. My blood chilled. He'd saved the card on his device from that casual dinner, turning a simple favor into a gateway for theft. "We can dispute them," she offered, "but it might take 3 to 7 days. Want to flag for fraud." The term hung heavy, implying reports, possibly authorities, consequences that could fracture family ties forever. But with Caleb's school fees due and our mortgage looming, hesitation wasn't an option. "File the disputes," I replied, throat dry, and mark it as fraud. Hanging up, I stared at the laptop, the charges still glaring. Thoughts of Caleb flooded in. He'd been relegated to corners of our home since Nathan's arrival, his room overtaken, his disappointment veiled, but evident when my attention diverted to Nathan's needs. I'd caught him sketching quietly on the floor, once his coding books pushed aside. The betrayal cut deeper than dollars. It was Nathan's sense of entitlement, as if my hard-earned stability was his playground. I opened my email, spotting confirmations forwarded to his inbox, purchases in my name without guilt. He'd exploited the trust I'd extended, knowing the tightrope I walked as a single mom in this Midwest town. The weight of those 9 months pressed on me. From that March evening, I'd given freely a roof fund's encouragement, believing it temporary. But Nathan's lack of effort had turned our space into chaos. Caleb's soccer gear buried under his clutter, my evenings stretched thin to compensate. Dad's influence worsened at his calls, reinforcing that I was the strong one expected to carry Nathan through his rough patches. He'd never seen my own struggles, the skipped meals, the deferred dreams for Caleb's coding passion. To him, Nathan's potential outweighed my reality. Filling out the bank's fraud form felt like etching a boundary in stone. My fingers moved with purpose, now no longer trembling. This wasn't just about reclaiming money. It was for my dignity, for Caleb's unchallenged space for the life we'd built despite odds. The process would take time, but initiating it sparked a quiet empowerment. I'd been the family's anchor too long, enabling Nathan's coasting while Dad applauded from afar. No more. As the form submitted, a flicker of resolve settled in pushing back the knots in my stomach. The house felt smaller, the air thicker with unspoken tensions, but I knew protecting our future meant confronting the past's hold. The next day in my Brookfield home, I dug deeper into the transactions that had drained my account. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows of our wooden house near Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across the counter where Nathan had left his phone charging carelessly overnight. The device sat there like an invitation, its screen dim but unlocked, a remnant of his lax habits. I'd barely slept the previous evening's revelations, churning in my mind, the $15,000 gone, the fraud form submitted, the cold resolve settling in. Now, with Caleb at school and the house quiet, I seized the moment. Picking up the phone, I navigated to the banking app, still logged in under a secondary profile he'd set up. My stomach twisted as the history-loaded purchases timed through the wee hours, each one calculated to evade notice. There it was, $2,500 for a soundbar at 2 in the morning, another $2,500 for premium golf clubs at 3, a $625 streaming subscription at dawn. He'd even routed through a VPN, masking the location to appear out of state as if that would bury the trail. Hands trembling slightly, I snapped screenshots of every detail, the digital clicks echoing my growing fury. This wasn't impulsive. Nathan had engineered it, disabling my alerts and rerouting them to his device, ensuring I'd stay in the dark while he indulged. The app's security logs confirmed it, an alternate user linked to his number notifications, silenced on my end. My blood ran cold at the premeditation, the way he'd bet on my oblivion. I set the phone down and called the bank again, my voice tight but controlled. The representative this time had a clipped professional tone as he verified my account. Yes, there's a secondary profile here, he said. Alerts were turned off and redirected. We'll need a fraud affidavit to proceed fully, but I can lock it now. The word fraud echoed a threshold I couldn't retreat from. With Caleb's fees pressing and our mortgage due, I had no luxury for second thoughts. Send the forms I instructed, jaw clenched against the implications. It could take 7 to 10 days, he warned, but escalating the disputes was underway. As we spoke, my phone buzzed, Dad calling. I answered, bracing for the familiar script. Rebecca, you're overreacting, he started his words, soft yet insistent. Nathan's no criminal. It was just a mistake. I scoffed, bitterly recounting the hidden profile, the rerouted alerts, the VPN cloak. He planned it, Dad. He lied straight to my face. A sigh came through the line, followed by a tale from Nathan's teen years borrowing Dad's car, returning it scratched, but apologizing eventually. He comes around, Dad insisted. You don't abandon family. The plea stung not just for defending Nathan, but for dismissing my pain. I'd been the one handling bills since young, covering for Nathan's messes, now balancing everything as a single parent. Dad never acknowledged the late nights, the skipped opportunities. To him, Nathan's charm trumped my efforts. I gripped the receiver, patience unraveling. I've supported him for 9 months, home, money, everything. This is theft. He paused, then softened further. You're the strong one, Rebecca. Help him through this. Frustration surged. His words rewrote me as the villain for daring to resist. I ended the call abruptly, the silence heavy and familiar, like an old wound reopening. Disappointment settled in, but I pushed it aside, returning to Nathan's phone. He'd deleted some notification history, but a cached push alert remained, confirming a luxury watch payment diverted to his device. Every layer uncovered his intent, designed to keep me unaware while he claimed my hard work. Thoughts of Caleb anchored me amid the anger. He'd endured so much, his room lost homework, displaced, even a planned trip to a science museum shelved because funds went to Nathan's needs. The betrayal wasn't merely financial. It eroded the peace I'd fought to maintain in our Brookfield haven. By noon, the air felt charged like a gathering storm. I'd organized my evidence, the screenshots, the bank confirmations, preparing for what came next. The family's web of expectations had bound me long enough, with Dad's loyalty blinding him to the cost. But clarity sharpened now. I couldn't afford to let Nathan's actions sink us further. As I saved the final screenshot, a shift occurred inside. No more swallowing pain for unity's sake. The fraud process hummed in the background, a step toward justice, but I knew confrontation loomed. The house, with its cluttered corners from Nathan's stay, felt ready for change. I'd carried the load alone. Now it was time to enforce boundaries he couldn't ignore. That afternoon in Brookfield, Wisconsin, I drove to a coffee shop to meet my friend Sophia Klein. The drive through our quiet Midwest town gave me a moment to breathe the familiar streets lined with modest homes, much like my wooden one near Lake Michigan. Sophia had been my anchor since high school days, her straightforward insight cutting through the noise of my family's complications. I pulled into the parking lot, the aroma of fresh brews wafting as I stepped inside, spotting her at a corner table with 2 mugs already steaming. We hugged briefly, and I sank into the chair, the weight of the morning's discoveries pressing down. Without preamble, I laid it all out, the hidden banking profile. Nathan had created the disabled alerts rerouted to his phone, the VPN mask on his overnight spending spree. I described the screenshots I'd captured, each one time-stamped proof of his deception, and how Dad had dismissed it all as a simple error. Sophia's eyes narrowed as she listened, stirring her coffee slowly. She didn't interrupt, letting me vent the frustration that had built over 9 months of Nathan's stay. I recounted the family meeting. I'd mentally rehearsed how Nathan's excuses would likely twist the narrative, making me seem the harsh one. Dad's blind loyalty stung most his calls, echoing years of expecting me to shoulder the load while Nathan skated by. "You're not the villain here," Sophia said, finally, setting her mug down with a firm clink. "Nathan's manipulating the situation and your dad's enabling it. You need to draw firm lines, starting with your finances." Her words landed solid, a reminder I'd needed amid the emotional fog. She leaned forward, her voice steady and practical, the kind of advice honed from our long friendship. Lock him out completely, change every password, every PIN, freeze any shared access, and keep an eye on your credit reports. I nodded, the simplicity of it cutting through my guilt. Sophia shared a story of a mutual acquaintance who'd lost everything to unchecked family borrowing, emphasizing that this wasn't selfishness. It was safeguarding Caleb's future and my peace. "You've carried them too long," she added. "It's time to prioritize yourself and your son. Nathan won't shift unless you force the issue." The clarity washed over me, a shift from the morning's churning anger to something anchored and resolute. Driving back to Brookfield, the landscape blurred slightly as her counsel replayed in my mind. The house came into view, its wooden facade, a symbol of the stability I'd fought to maintain now, threatened by Nathan's greed. I wasn't waiting for the bank's full process. Action started now. Back at my desk, I logged into every account, methodically updating passwords and enabling 2-factor alerts tied only to my devices. No more vulnerabilities. Sophia's suggestion to consult a professional if needed lingered, but for the moment, these steps felt like reclaiming control. The fraud affidavit was in motion, disputes escalating, but this personal lockdown was my immediate shield. The evening settled quietly, Caleb returning from school with his backpack slung low. I hugged him a bit tighter, mindful of how Nathan's presence had overshadowed his needs. His coding projects pushed aside, friends avoided due to the cluttered chaos. No longer. I envisioned the guest room cleared as art supplies, returned the dining table free for homework without intrusion. Sophia's words echoed. Protecting my bank wasn't just about money. It was guarding our home's harmony, ensuring Caleb's light wasn't dimmed by others' shadows. As night fell, the house felt on the cusp of change. I'd given Nathan a haven, funds, endless chances, only to face this betrayal. Dad's pleas couldn't sway me anymore. His withdrawal, if it came, would be his choice. Boundaries weren't barriers, they were necessities. For the first time in months, a lightness crept in, like shedding a long-carried load. The bank's reversals might take days, but my resolve was immediate. Tomorrow, I'd press forward, ready to enforce the limits Nathan had crossed. The next morning in my Brookfield home, I was back on the phone with the bank, clutching the fraud affidavit. Light streamed into the kitchen of our wooden house near Lake Michigan, a crisp Midwest dawn that contrasted the turmoil inside me. Caleb had headed off to a friend's place early, sparing him the tension I knew was coming. The representative's voice came through clear, processing the cancellations. I'd requested $2,500 for the golf club, $625 for the streaming service, $3,750 for the luxury watch. We've reversed $8,125 so far, she confirmed. The rest are under review with updates in a week. I exhaled slowly, a small burden easing. It wasn't the full $15,000, but enough to cover Caleb's school fees and keep our mortgage current. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope flickered. With that lifeline secured, I turned to the harder task. I called Nathan and Dad into the living room, my tone even as they settled at the coffee table. The space felt charged sunlight, highlighting the clutter Nathan had accumulated over 9 months. Caleb's absence made it easier. This was between us, adults. I laid out the evidence calmly, the screenshots from his phone, the hidden profile, the masked transactions. You didn't just use my card for snacks, I said, meeting Nathan's eyes. You drained $15,000 and tried to conceal it. His face flushed, but instead of remorse, he leaned in defensively. You're painting me as a thief, he snapped. I plan to repay you. Why embarrass me like this in front of Dad? I blinked at his audacity, pointing to the digital proofs. You silenced my alerts, used a VPN to hide. That's no accident. He crossed his arms, scoffing. You're exaggerating. I needed those items to sort my life. You've got resources, Rebecca. Why turn this personal? My jaw tightened. He was flipping the script as always. It's personal when you take from Caleb's future for your luxuries. Dad, silent, until then cleared his throat, his expression waited. Let's ease up, Rebecca, he said gently. Family rises above this. Nathan didn't aim to hurt you. Forgive and move forward. I stared chest, aching at his familiar plea. Forgive, I shook my head. I've housed him, funded him for 9 months, and he stole in return. I'm protecting my son, my home. Dad leaned back, eyes softening like addressing a stubborn child. You've always been the resilient one. Nathan, struggling, offer support, not blame. Frustration boiled. His words echoed decades of the same dynamic. Nathan faltered. I fixed all for family's sake. Nathan paced, then hands clenched. You're acting superior, lording your stability over me like I'm worthless. The accusation hit sharp, twisting my intent, but I saw it for deflection, his go-to tactic. I stood, voice low and firm. This ends here. Nathan, you have 10 days to leave. His eyes widened, then narrowed, fist slamming the table with a rattle that shook the mugs. Kicking me out. You're so selfish. I'm your brother, treating me like trash. The sting landed, but Sophia's advice from the coffee shop anchored me. Boundaries weren't cruelty. They were survival. You spent my savings on whims while I worked nights. That's not brotherhood. That's exploitation. Dad rose, reaching for my arm. Rebecca, think what this does to us all. I pulled back, heart heavy yet certain. I am thinking of me, of Caleb. The room fell silent, the impact sinking in. Nathan stormed off muttering, and Dad sank back, defeated. Guilt tugged briefly, but a stronger current drowned it. Control, finally mine. For years, I'd sacrificed under their expectations, forgiving, fixing, fading into the background. No more. Later at my desk, the bank's email confirmed the partial reversal, a tangible step forward. I changed the last password, sealing Nathan out for good. The house felt lighter, as if breathing again. A week later, in Brookfield, Wisconsin, the house felt quieter without my brother's usual noise. The absence of Nathan's loud phone conversations and TV hum created a strange peace in our wooden home near Lake Michigan, a freeing stillness I'd almost forgotten. His presence over 9 months had filled every space, but now the air seemed lighter, even if the 10-day deadline I'd set loomed. I'd insisted he take a job at the local hardware store as a condition to extend his stay slightly, hoping it might instill some accountability. He grumbled, but started only to quit after 3 days, complaining to Caleb about the endless standing, something my son overheard on the porch. It didn't surprise me. It only hardened my stance. Nathan wasn't transforming here, not under my roof. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen table, scrawled in his messy handwriting. Sorry for the mess, it read. I'll sort things and make amends. Don't hold it against me. Vague as ever, no specifics on repayment or plans, just an evasion wrapped in faint regret. I stood there, paper in hand, a blend of relief and irritation washing over. He'd packed his duffel and slipped out before dawn, leaving the guest room bare, but the sink still stacked with his dishes. Caleb wandered in, eyes sleepy, and asked if Uncle Nathan had gone. I pulled him close in a hug. It's us again now, I said, my voice steady. The boy nodded, a small smile breaking through as if sensing the shift. That afternoon, Dad called, his tone laced with worry. I heard Nathan left, he said. You could have given him more time. He was making an effort. I held the phone tightly, my tolerance thin. Effort 3 days at the job, then gone. His note promises nothing. Dad's side softening. He's your brother lost right now. You're the one who binds us. The words pierced, replaying years of that expectation. I, the pillar, he, the excused. I breathed deep, keeping firm. I've bound enough. Caleb and I come first. He paused, then pressed gently. Don't shut him out forever. I shook my head unseen. I'm not shutting. He must earn entry. Ending the call, a weight lifted. I'd chased their approval too long. Now peace lay in the quiet. Walking through the house, I noted the reclaimed space, Caleb's art supplies back in the guest room, his soccer shoe no longer lost under piles. That evening, we sat together, me guiding him through a coding project for school. His grin widened, unguarded and bright, filling the room with a warmth absent for months. This was our sanctuary, again free from Nathan's chaos. Sophia's advice echoed, protect your peace, your son's path. I'd followed through, fortifying accounts with alerts, scheduling credit checks. The bank emailed that morning confirming more reversals totaling $11,875 now. Not everything, but sufficient to rebuild to fund Caleb's coding camp. I deferred. The note lingered in my thoughts, its ambiguity, a sign of Nathan's refusal to own up. No mention of jobs or restitution, just words to soothe his conscience. I tucked it into a drawer, not discarding it yet, but unwilling to let it draw me back. Dad's silence after our talk felt louder, his choice to side with Nathan costing our connection. I didn't pursue. I'd expended enough energy there. Family, I realized, was Caleb now, our routines, our growth. As days unfolded, I centered on him planning a weekend at a nearby science museum, watching his excitement spark over code ideas. The quiet wasn't emptiness. It was room for possibility. I felt unburdened, like reclaiming a part of myself lost in the giving. Nathan might return someday or not. Dad might reach out or fade. But here, with Caleb's laughter echoing freely, I had what mattered. The bank's work continued, but my quiet stand had already yielded justice. 2 weeks later, in my Brookfield home, my bank account was recovering with the final email confirmation. The notification pinged on my desk in our wooden house near Lake Michigan, a quiet Midwest morning where the light felt softer, less burdened. $13,750 credited back, covering the mortgage, Caleb's coding camp, and lingering bills. I sat there, the numbers on the screen, a silent triumph after the chaos. Caleb was at school, his backpack now stocked with fresh supplies I could afford without scrimping. For the first time in months, I wasn't patching holes just to stay afloat. Relief coursed through me, loosening knots I'd carried too long. Word had trickled in through a shared contact, Nathan scraping by in a modest apartment nearby, like Madison picking up warehouse shifts, but quitting after a week, griping about the demands. The bank had noted his actions as suspect, their probe now tracking his card misuse across accounts. I didn't dive into details, but knowing he faced repercussions felt like balance, not spite. He'd crafted his own path. For once, I wasn't mending it. Dad had fallen quiet, no calls, no messages, not even an inquiry about Caleb. After our last exchange, where I'd held firm on earning trust, his absence spoke volumes. Sadness touched me briefly, his withdrawal, a choice to align with Nathan over us. I'd sought his nod too often. Now I released that chase, finding solace in the stillness. Sophia dropped by that weekend toting coffee and her signature direct wisdom. We settled on the couch, the living room uncluttered, and ours again. You chose right, she said, sipping slowly. Boundaries give you strength. I agreed, reflecting on how I'd once viewed kindness as boundless, giving open to exploitation. Her guidance had reshaped that locking accounts, setting limits, prioritizing Caleb. It was a tough lesson, forged in sleepless worry and betrayal's bite. I wouldn't let compassion become a flaw again. Caleb burst in that afternoon, face alight as he waved a certificate from his coding class. Top project, he beamed, handing it over. I enveloped him in a hug, heart swelling. We mapped out a pizza evening, a simple joy sidelined for too long amid Nathan's drain. His room glowed with posters and books, reinstated no more corners for his work. I'd begun saving for a summer outing, perhaps to Chicago's planetarium, fueling his curiosity. Our life wasn't flawless, but it belonged to us steady and forward-moving. Gazing back, the price of blind trust stood clear. Nathan hadn't just taken funds. He'd stripped my security, my faith, and kin. Yet from that clarity emerged. Boundaries weren't divisions, they were choices I controlled, doors to open or secure. My generosity was mine to offer, not demanded. As I tucked Caleb in that night, his desk lamp casting a warm hue, a serene fortitude filled me. Nathan's return remained uncertain, Dad's outreach too, but Caleb, our home, the future we shaped, that was my true win. In the quiet aftermath, a profound calm settled over our Brookfield home, the kind earned through hard-won boundaries. The wooden walls near Lake Michigan no longer echoed with Nathan's disruptions. Instead, they held space for Caleb's laughter and my renewed focus. $13,750 recovered wasn't merely funds. It was validation, a quiet reclaiming of what betrayal had stolen. Nathan's distant struggles and Dad's silence lingered as reminders, but they no longer define me. I'd learned that true family thrives on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. The lesson cut deep. Unguarded trust invites exploitation, but setting limits fosters strength. Kindness, when protected, becomes a choice, not a vulnerability. For those navigating similar paths at 35 or beyond, remember, quiet resolve often speaks loudest. If you've faced family betrayal and chosen boundaries over chaos, share your experience in the comments. I'd value your insights. And if this story resonated, consider subscribing for more tales of empowerment.